Imagine an author spending his entire life building this incredible labyrinth of ideas, of characters, of beautiful lies, only to turn around at the very end and hand you the key? Well, that's what we're talking about today. We are unlocking Soren Kierkegaard's book, The Point of View from My Work as an Author. This is the book where the master of masks finally, supposedly, shows his true face and tells us exactly how to read everything he ever wrote.
So let's just think about that for a second. What if an entire career, all the conflicting voices, all the dizzying philosophy, was just one giant setup for a single final reveal? That is precisely the claim Kierkegaard makes. And in this explainer, we're going to follow the breadcrumbs he left behind and try to solve this incredible literary puzzle. You know, to really get the sheer audacity of this, you have to realize that Kierkegaard didn't just write books. Oh no, he created a literary masquerade ball. He invented a whole cast of authors, each with their own unique voice, their own philosophy, and they often completely disagreed with each other. It was a true labyrinth, and he was the guy who built it.
For instance, take this guy, Victor Eremita. He's the fictional editor of Kierkegaard's big breakout book, Either Or. He comes across as this cool, almost academic observer who just stumbled upon these amazing papers. He's one of the first masks Kierkegaard ever put on, and boy, was he a convincing one.
And then you have someone like Johannes de Silentio. He's the passionate, deeply troubled author of Fear and Trembling, a book all about a man wrestling with the absolutely terrifying nature of faith. His voice is the total opposite of Eremita's. And here's the wild part. They were both Kierkegaard. So what gives? Why go through all the trouble of creating this elaborate and, frankly, confusing cast of characters?
Well, it turns out the confusion was the whole point. Kierkegaard actually called his grand strategy a form of godly deception. You see, he believed that his audience, everyone in 19th century Denmark, was living under this massive illusion. They all thought they were Christians, but in his mind, they had no idea what the radical demands of faith actually were. And he knew he couldn't just stand on a soapbox and tell them that. He had to trick them into seeing it for themselves. And this, right here, is the heart of his entire method, what he called indirect communication. His argument was pretty simple. You cannot just shout the truth at someone who is living in a delusion. It just doesn't work. What you have to do is enter their world, speak their language, and then gently guide them out. You have to, in his own famous words, deceive them into the truth.
And here's how his tactical approach worked, broken down into 3 steps. First, he'd meet his readers where they were, in what he called the aesthetic stage. You know, a life focused on art, pleasure, worldly things. Step 2, he'd create a pseudonym that perfectly mirrored that worldview back at them, making them feel completely understood. And then finally, once he had their trust, he would wound from behind, revealing the hollowness of that life and pointing towards something much, much deeper. It was kind of a spiritual midwifery.
So who was the real person pulling all the strings behind these literary puppets? Well, in The Point of View, Kierkegaard finally unmasks the author of the authors, and he reveals a secret that he claims was hiding in plain sight from the very beginning. This is the big reveal, what he called the duplexity of his work. Okay, so while the public was going wild for his poetic, kind of scandalous books, what he calls his left hand, he was at the same time publishing these explicitly religious books under his own name, his right hand. And this was his proof. The lure, something like Either Or, was designed to grab your attention, but the purpose, signaled by works like Two Upbuilding Discourses, was always religious, right from day one. But you know, for Kierkegaard, this was way more than just a clever literary strategy. He really came to believe that he was an instrument of a higher power, a pen in the hand of God. He felt that his whole life, including his greatest personal sacrifices, like breaking off his engagement, was being divinely guided to serve this one single authorial mission. It completely transformed his work from just a literary project into a profound spiritual calling. But just when you think you finally cracked the code, Kierkegaard, being Kierkegaard, throws in one last maddening twist. Is this grand unmasking the actual honest-to-God truth, or is it maybe his most elaborate deception of all? I mean, in the book itself, he's adamant. He calls it a direct communication, a final, honest report to history. After this whole career built on hiding and speaking in riddles, he's promising that he's finally telling us, straight up, what he was really doing all along. But come on, with a guy who perfected the art of deception, is anything ever really that simple? Can we actually take this direct confession from the master of irony at face value?
Scholars have been tearing their hair out over this for more than 150 years. And here's why there's so much doubt. For one, critics wonder if he's basically rewriting his own history, forcing this neat religious purpose onto a career that was probably a lot messier as it was happening. And get this, he claims to be totally direct, but then he admits his deepest, most personal relationship with God can't actually be made public. So that leads to the ultimate question. Is this final unmasking just another performance? Is the mask of directness his most clever and final mask of all?
Okay, so whether you think it's a genuine key or just one final brilliant trick, why does its one little book matter so much? Why is it so crucial for understanding his massive, often intimidating body of work? What's the real takeaway here?
Ultimately, it leaves us with two main ways to look at it. On the one hand, it could be the ultimate key, the author's own map to help us find our way through the labyrinth he built. Or it could be the final mask, one last complex layer that he added to the maze itself. But no matter how you see it, the point of view is the essential bridge that connects the private, suffering man to his public, performative masks. It is the absolute closest we will ever get to hearing the why behind it all, straight from the source.
And that really brings us to the most important point. In the end, this grand unmasking wasn't about getting a round of applause. He didn't want us to just admire the genius of the puzzle maker. He wanted us to understand the heart of the man who created it, to see him not as some distant, untouchable philosopher, but as a fellow traveler, struggling, just like the rest of us, on the incredibly difficult path of faith. The labyrinth wasn't the point, it was the path, and he left us this map, not so we could find him, but maybe, just maybe, so we could find a way for ourselves.